Had a really interesting situation happen this week. I had a potential client come in for a consult. We were actually going over his workout, and I have to say he was tracking everything. He had actually gotten some advice from another trainer, had set up a workout, brought all of his paperwork in, and he started going over what he did during his workout. And I noticed something kept throwing me off. I couldn't quite understand what he was talking about because he kept using workout for the word exercise. And I realized something. It's kind of difficult to have a good fitness program if you don't understand the words. In other words, you want to make sure that you learn basic fitness vocabulary. Today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. I appreciate you joining me today. I'm Garrett Williamson, president of Personal Edge Fitness and the host of this show. Before we get going, as usual, I want to tell you how to get in touch with us. If you have any questions, you can reach us at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at my email address, which is garrett@personaledgefitness.com. Of course, that's our website, personaledgefitness.com, and also our Facebook page, Personal Edge Fitness. If worse comes to worse, you want to hit me up on Twitter, we're at Team PE. That's at Team and the letters P. E is in Personal Edge. Last week we talked about water. A big surprise, Garrett's talking about water again. But I'm so glad we did that podcast because I had more response about the idea of taking in enough water, even as much as I've preached it for over 20 years now. I had more response from clients, from potential clients, from people that are fans of the podcast about changing their habits and changing their lifestyle as far as how much water they would take in, strictly because they learned the effects of water on dementia, or actually preventing dementia and even treating dementia. So I appreciate the response. I'm so glad that it had the effect that it did, and I will be adding more to that from the series, the book series that I'm reading about taking in water and all the effects that water does. But I really appreciate your questions, and also appreciate the fact that we are making sure that we're touching on the topics that are hitting home. So thank y'all so much for your response on that. I really appreciate it. This is interesting. I actually started to do another podcast. In fact, I've got a series that's going to be coming up dealing with some of the top 10 killers and what they are, and a little more description about how fitness, nutrition, lifestyle, and mindset actually affect those. Because there's a lot of people that have general questions. They've heard of diabetes, but they really don't know what it is, and they don't really understand all of it. So there's things like diabetes, heart disease, liver failure, these kind of things that are affected, of course, by fitness, nutrition, lifestyle, and mindset that I want to go over. And I actually wanted to start that today. But the reason I didn't was because of this consult I had this week. A gentleman came in, he was a super guy, referred to me by his physician, and he was talking about his workout. And I applaud his efforts because he had done quite a bit of tracking in his workouts. I mean, he had this great folder, had a good workout broken down that somebody had written up for him, had given him, and he was tracking the days that he was actually doing the exercises and keeping up with his weights. And not only that, but he was also tracking food on MyFitnessPal. I really appreciate the effort that he put into it. But when we got to discussing this, he kept on saying, well, some days I do 10 workouts, and some days I do 3 workouts, and some days I do, and I was looking at him thinking, wow, you're working out 10 times a day? That's amazing. What had happened was he started listing his workouts, and he showed me his paperwork, and what he was doing is he was calling the individual exercises workouts. Well, he was getting his terminology mixed up. And I thought it was interesting that nobody had actually described to him or told him the basic terminology when it comes to fitness. And after over 100 episodes that I've done on the podcast, I realized that's something that we've never gone over. The terminology involved in fitness. And so I've got a long list here, but I'm gonna briefly go over the different terminology that we use when talking about fitness. I think it'll be easier for you to understand aspects of the show and many things that we talk about on the show. And though you may know a lot of these words, I'm going to get into full description. I'll be surprised if you don't learn something today out of this list of terms. You probably heard me talk about in the podcast before when I started talking about some kind of a complex issue like metabolism or anaerobic capacity. I always start out with, I'm sorry, kind of tough giving you an example. After the show, I'll be able to kick out about 40 different examples right off the top of my head. But usually what I do when I talk about those things is, of course, I break them down. And the first thing I tell you is a definition. Like the definition of age. We inherently believe that means deterioration, and it doesn't. It's the different actions that happen either spontaneously or through deliberate action. And when I broke that definition down in my series that I did on the live age, I actually told you, it's amazing. We can't really prove any of these things happen spontaneously. Spontaneously seems to be the excuse that we use, like genetics, but we can prove how these things happen through deliberate action. And my quest is to change that definition of that word age and get rid of spontaneous out of there because, like I say, there's not one single clinical study that proves that deterioration happens strictly because of time passing on a calendar. But things like that. So I'm going to start off with a very easy one. I'm going to start off with the idea of physical activity. And I've actually got some notes here that I made just because I want to make sure that I'm clear on the definitions that I'm using. So in physical activity is basically any kind of movement that causes your body to use energy. Pretty simple. And as I said with some of this vocabulary, it's going to be rather simple. You probably knew that or understood it, but that's basically what physical activity is. How about this one? It's in the name of our business. Fitness. I mean, exactly what is the definition of fitness? It's the ability to handle the physical work and play of everyday life without becoming tired. I thought that was very interesting, that it actually has that last part of it, without becoming tired. Because if you think about it, the ability to handle the physical work and play of everyday life, well, that could be work. That could also be some sort of definition for exercise. But I like the fact that the addition to that is without being tired. And that's true, that if you think of somebody that's fit, they're able to get through those activities without getting completely worn out. And that's kind of the goal of fitness. So, okay. We're staying on the simple. I'm going to get some more complicated ones, but I like to break down these ones that we assume we know, just like we assume we know what age means. We assume we know what diet means. Diet means restriction. No, actually it doesn't. Diet is simple. Diet means food, taking in a food or not taking in food. If Gandhi, when he was doing his hunger strike, when the Muslims and the Hindus were fighting, well, he was on a diet. He wasn't eating at all. And that's basically what it is. It's not food. Excuse me. I said food a minute ago. Diet is an eating pattern. So if you're overeating, that's a diet. It's an overeating diet. If you're undereating, that's a diet. It's an undereating diet. And somebody that's suffering from anorexia, well, they're on a diet. People that are obese and taking in way too many calories, well, that's a diet. Diet strictly means a simple eating plan. But exercise, physical activity that is planned, structured, and repetitive that improves personal fitness. Well, that makes sense. And that's what an exercise is. The individual that came and met with me this week, I explained to him what he was using as workout was actually exercises. He was talking about individual exercises. Strength is easy. The ability of your muscles to exert a force. That's what strength is. Now, we've talked about strength before and the fact that the stronger a muscle is, the more flexible it is, but basic strength just is a measurement of how much force your muscles can handle. Endurance. This is one that's used a lot. I'm going to use a few of these. I'm going to talk about endurance. I'm going to talk about heart and lung endurance, muscle endurance, aerobic exercise, and anaerobic exercise. Now, the reason those last two are in there is they deal with endurance, but just the basic word endurance. What is that? Well, it's the ability to perform vigorous activity without getting overly tired. That's pretty simple. But let's expand on that a little bit. Let's talk about heart and lung endurance. Now, it's interesting. I've got two definitions here. I've got heart and lung endurance, and I've got aerobic exercise. But believe it or not, these are somewhat related. You'll see what I mean here. Heart and lung endurance is the measure of how effectively your heart and lungs work during moderate to vigorous physical activity or exercise. And the reason I say that has something to do with the aerobic exercise, well, let me get to aerobic exercise, the definition of that. Rhythmic, non-stop, moderate to vigorous activity that requires large amounts of oxygen and works the heart. You see what I'm saying? Heart and lung endurance is the measure of how effectively your heart and lungs work during moderate to vigorous exercise. And then aerobic exercise talks about the large amounts of oxygen and works the heart, the things that are required in that territory. And I tie these two together because aerobic means with oxygen. Now, this is a word that confuses a lot of people. It's amazing how many times I'm conducting HIIT-type exercises, high-intensity interval training, which is what HIIT stands for. And I'm actually working what is called anaerobic capacity or anaerobic exercise. I'm going to get to that in a second. And as soon as the client becomes out of breath and we stop the exercise and they're completely out of breath, they'll tell me, wow, that's really aerobic. Actually, it's not. It's without oxygen, which is anaerobic. Aerobic means with oxygen. And so, simply put, it's aerobic exercise, even easier than the definition that I just gave you, is an exercise that runs your heart rate up to around 65% or higher, 65 to 80. I actually say 65 to 75, but 65 to 80% of your maximum heart rate. And the easiest way to determine that, if you're not wearing a heart rate monitor, is conversational pace. It's when you're on a treadmill, when you're on out for a walk, when you're doing a run, when you're on an elliptical, what have you. And you really would like to stop, but you can go on longer. In fact, you can go on longer, so much so that if you're working with somebody, you actually can complain to them about how much you want to stop because you have enough oxygen where you can talk. You may be breathing a little bit, but you can still talk okay. That's aerobic exercise. Anaerobic, like I said a minute ago, it basically means without oxygen. Now, to give you an idea of what anaerobic exercise is, and I did a podcast on this, but think about sprinting. A sprint is anaerobic. Sprint, recover is anaerobic capacity, how fast you can recover after doing a sprint. Anaerobic exercises also, most strength training is anaerobic. Now, there's some muscle endurance that's involved there, but if you're doing strength training, you're usually keeping your repetitions, and I'll get to that word in a minute, down to where you're doing 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 repetitions. Not only are you exhausting the muscle, but a lot of times you're really out of breath at the end of that exercise. Well, if you're out of breath, you can't continue that conversation, then that is your anaerobic type exercise. Next is flexibility. I threw that out a minute ago. And we talk a lot about flexibility, how important flexibility is, and how flexibility is actually tied to strength. But did you ever know exactly what the definition of flexibility? Well, flexibility is the ability to move joints fully and easily. Basically, it's what we call range of motion. Can you fully move that muscle? Can you fully move that joint? You'll see this a lot with people that injured their shoulder, or as individuals stop working out, they stop doing upper body work, and as time passes on a calendar and they continue not to do those activities, they'll actually lock up in the shoulders. They'll get to a point where they can't raise their arm up over their head, and that's very, very common. A lot of times, of course, we attribute that with age. It has absolutely nothing to do with time passing on a calendar. It has to do with inactivity. But it's that range of motion, being able to move that joint fully through its range of motion. Body composition. I like this one. I left it on the list because it's very important. I did a quick hit a few weeks ago on BMI and how ridiculously absurd the Quetelet Index from 1832 is as far as measuring fitness. It's ridiculous. Don't waste your time with it. If you're interested in knowing something beyond your weight, which I highly recommend, weight is the gravitational pull of the earth on your body. That's all it is. It doesn't tell me anything about your fitness. You really want to know how fit you are? Measure your body fat. And that has to do with body composition. Body composition is the proportions of bones, muscle, and fluid that make up body weight. Bones, muscle, and fluid. Actually, I'm going to throw one more thing in there, and I'm going to throw in fat. Obviously, because a lot of that's fluid, and that's kind of what they're covering in that territory. But if you think of bones, muscles, I also throw in their organs for people to understand. Fluid, body fat, that's what body composition is. That's what basically makes up your body. And back to what I was saying about measurement a minute ago, if you want to measure something, you want to track something, body fat is your key. There's no lying to body fat. As I said in a previous podcast when I was talking about BMI, you can be a BMI of overweight, 26, somewhere around there, and actually be very fit. I have trainers that have BMIs because it's such an absurd measurement. It doesn't measure anything. It's a guesstimate, that are in incredible shape. They have body fat that is in the teens, if not lower. And on a BMI scale, they're obese strictly because BMI is nothing more than like height versus weight. And as I said in the podcast, it is a calculation that was derived by a statistician and astrologer from the 1832s who just was very left-brained and wanted some kind of mathematical way to determine how fit he was. Not until 1970 did somebody term it body mass index, which makes it seem very scientific. And that person, as you've heard me say before, was Angel Keys, the same person that came up with the lie of food. A couple others here. Warm up and cool down. Warm up and cool down are confused a lot because you think, okay, you're warmed up. Well, I have somebody that comes in to work out with me and I'll say, let's do a warm up. And they say, well, it's hot outside. I'm already warm. That's not what a warm up is. What a warm up is gentle exercise you do to prepare your muscles for moderate to vigorous activity. Now, though you may be sweating because you walked in from outside, doesn't mean those capillaries, those arteries, those veins are open up in order to have good transport of blood to get to your muscles. And we're about to exercise I'm just making this up, pectoralis major. We're about to go and work the chest muscle, big muscle, and you don't have those energy transport, which is what blood flow is, and nutrient transport. You don't have the pathways for the nutrient transport and energy transport open. That can actually damage your muscle. You can actually pull a muscle. You're not going to get as effective a workout from that exercise if you don't correctly warm up the muscle. In other words, do that gentle exercise to kind of let the muscle know, hey, look, we're about to do some work here. Everybody wake up. Cool down, just the opposite. Cool down is gentle exercises that let your body adjust to ending a workout. And again, that keeps you from cramping up. It also brings you back down and allows the body to start that recovery process. So cool down is very important. Again, it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with temperature. It has to do with what state your muscles and your body are in at that time. A few more. Frequency and intensity. Now, in order to change something in your workout, in other words, to make a difference, let's say you've plateaued. That's a very common word that's used a lot about a workout, which means you've hit a level and you're not moving any further. You seem to be on a plateau. Well, something's got to change. And one of the three things that have to change is frequency, intensity, or time. That's what has to change about your workout if it's not a nutritional problem. As far as your workout's concerned, one of those three things has got to change in order to make some sort of a different adjustment or to see different results. Frequency, the number of days you work out each week. Pretty easy. In fact, the gentleman that came in and saw me was working out 3 days a week and had some great improvements, and he wanted to improve even more, so the person he was working with actually recommended he go to 4 days a week. He's trying to increase the frequency. The problem was that he didn't explain to him that he was doing full body on Thursday, very aggressive full body, and then he turned around and did full body on Friday, aggressive full body, and he actually realized when he moved to 4 days a week, he was going backwards. And that has something to do with working with a trainer that has a degree in the field and understands physiology and anatomy. That's frequency. Intensity, basically how much energy you use when conducting the workout. So in other words, make it a little bit harder. Intensity can be, you can increase intensity by increasing speed. You can increase intensity by increasing the weight. If you're curling 30-pound dumbbells and you move to a 35-pound dumbbell, now you've increased intensity. That's what intensity is. And I did mention time a minute ago. And that's, again, if you're working out for a half an hour and you increase it to an hour, you've increased time. And time is actually the time spent in the exercise itself. Target heart rate is the last one I want to go over. Target heart rate is interesting. We don't do as much heart rate training as we used to. It's still important. It's still very important, but heart rate has become, we understand it to be similar to blood pressure. I don't have anybody ask me that as often as I used to, but it used to be that people would ask me, what's a good blood pressure? Well, that differs from person to person. Now, it doesn't differ erratically, but it does differ from person to person. And that has to do with their body composition, has to do a lot of things there with basically your individual fitness level. Heart rate can be the same way. We have people that operate at a higher heart rate, and heart rate we usually assimilate to age, which is why we come up with these basic numbers. Well, the more fit you are, then I have somebody that is 80, but he's working out like a 50-year-old. Quote unquote. Again, age has nothing to do with it, but target heart rate's been skewed a little bit because of that. But target heart rate is the number of heartbeats per minute that you should aim for during moderate to vigorous exercise. And that rule of thumb for moderate to vigorous exercise is 65 to 85%. Now, earlier I gave you some numbers, 65 to 80, and what I say 65 to 75. 65 to 75 is typically your aerobic capacity, aerobic exercise. Remember what I was saying about that? That is exercise that you can continue to talk. You can continue to carry on conversation. Aerobic means with oxygen. Getting to that anaerobic capacity is once you cross that 75%, start getting to 80, 85, even 90, even 100% of your maximum heart rate. That is your anaerobic territory. That is the place where you're breaking down muscle tissue. You are increasing your body's ability to sprint, recover, sprint, recover, sprint, recover. But continuing at that rate, you can, and especially if you're not very warmed up or you don't have enough energy on board, as in food, then you can start to burn muscle tissue at that rate. And the reason being is that muscle burns like toilet paper, fat burns like a log. And so that's why that aerobic capacity is very important, because that's that long, slow burn. Not against anaerobic capacity. You know I'm a big fan of that because I use it a lot in HIIT style training, because I say we exercise the way we actually live. And anaerobic capacity, increasing your anaerobic capacity, your ability to sprint, recover, increases your ability to handle stress. So I'm a big fan of that. Now, I spit out a bunch of words at you, and pardon me for doing that. I kind of put this together because a little bit last minute, because I was so shocked when this person had come in. He'd been working out for 3 years, and his terminology was off. And I was afraid that anybody may be listening to my podcast and not really understanding what I'm talking about because we're not going over the basic vocabulary. So if you have any questions about this or any of our other podcasts, please contact me at area code 251-278-3343. That's area code 251-278-EDGE, EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett@personaledgefitness.com, which is, of course, our website and our Facebook page. Hit me up at Twitter if need be, at Team PE. I'd love to hear from you. Just want to make sure we get the words correct before we go on any further. And that's just one more way we help you live your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.